We started recording, so just so everyone knows.
Yep, we're recording.
Okay.
This meeting. Thank you. And the minutes for May have been circulated. A motion to approve.
So moved. This is Colleen.
Thank you. A second.
Second.
Second, Adam.
All those in favor? Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved. Thank you. Thank you. And as we've been doing, like we used to do in person, we have time at the beginning for, these are open meetings. If anyone from the community would like to comment, now would be a good time. Please, would anyone like to address the FAC at this point? Okay, hearing none, we will move on. If anyone does join from the community, please let us know. Thank you. This is our last meeting of the school year. I'd like to thank everybody, staff, members of FAC. Barbara's joined us this evening. So I'd like to thank everyone for this past year. It's been an interesting year. Unusual in many ways. We have not met at all in person. I would have thought maybe we'd have a chance to meet at least once or twice, but that wasn't to be. So really, thank you. It's in some ways more efficient to do this virtually, but in some ways it's tougher. I especially want to thank staff for really helping out, especially Michael. Just dealing with the technology and a lot of the work to make these things happen. So thank him and everyone else who attends. I'd also like to thank a number of members who are moving on, either through their terms ending or other reasons. And I think I've got everyone. I apologize if I miss someone. Please let me know if I do miss anyone. So Chandy's been with us and her 2-year appointment is ending. And so she will be leaving FAC. I want to thank her for the last, I think, 4 years of service. Thank you. Stacy Snyder has been with us the full 6 years. She was a former chair, and I really looked up to how she led FAC as chair, and in some ways tried to follow her lead. She's fantastic, and she continues to be fantastic for Arlington. She serves on JFAC now, and I'd like to thank her for her service. And Colleen, who was vice chair, also will not be with us next year for a family move. She's been wonderful vice chair, and I will miss her and we will miss her. So really thank you to those three for all their efforts. A number of other people whose 2-year terms have ended have been willing to re-up. I've heard from many of them. Thank you. I'm glad they're joining us next year. I'll be with us for 1 more year. And so we will be getting some new members next year, but I'm glad we have some continuation. Did I miss anybody who's leaving? Okay, good. I was going through my notes and I was worried I missed something. So really, thanks again for everything that this group has done. One more check. Okay, and I wish the best to Colleen. I think she's moving up to see family in New Hampshire this next year. So I hope it works out really well up there. We'll miss you. Do we have any liaison updates? Okay, we do not. I don't think anyone contacted me ahead of time. All right. Jeff, you want to get into the use permit?
I'm talking to a screen. I guess the question has always come with regard to the use permit. I want to give you a little bit of background. When I first got here, we used to have like 87 items on our use permit conditions, and we have been working with the county over time to reduce the items that we've had in the use permit. I think if you go to the county, you can see some of the use permits. They have all of the attachments in there. I literally have just been trying to go through the read use permit at this point in time to try to pull it up, but we're down. We cut the items in half working with the county. And I think that one of the things with regard to the use permit is, I think in order to do the use permit process, we get the design to a certain point, and then we go in front of the county and we look at the parking, all of the coordination that has to be done with regard to the project. I think there is actually benefit to the use permit in a lot of respects. So I don't know that we want it to go away 100%. I think that the biggest benefit of the use permit is it allows us in our zoning for school properties to modify the height, the setback, and the number of parking spaces. If we didn't have that opportunity, we would probably end up having to build to the zoning code, which I guess some people would call a benefit and others would probably call it a detriment. So I don't really have a formal presentation. Are there any specific questions anyone has with regard to that? To the use permit?
I guess not. Okay. Anything else, Jeff?
Well, I can bring up, as I said, you can go in and it's got all the backup information. I'll share this screen just to give people a flavor of what is in the use permit.
I stopped sharing, Jeff.
Okay. Let's see this one. Okay, there we go. All right, can everybody see that?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Essentially, it gets us to agree to standards, conducting pre-construction meetings. I hope I'm looking at the right one. But anyhow, it has us agreeing to the laws that apply. It has us getting our permits, requiring us to get all of our permits and communication that's required project. Also, the hours of working is in our use permit, which is essentially has been modified to the zoning noise ordinance. So you can see that essentially one of the things that they used to require was undergrounding. They've been a little more flexible on that with us in the past. A couple of projects. Undergrounding means we take all the utilities surrounding our site and put them under the ground. But we do end up doing streetscapes, but a lot of times with streetscapes, the county will contribute as part of joint funding to do some of that work. So that's really what a use permit is. You know, tree pits, what we have to provide. Water service would be where we have it shown. Sanitary sewer requirements. Clear horizontal separations with regard to storm water. So there's really nothing that we wouldn't have to do. I think that prior to going to the county board for the use permit review, we do go in front of all of the commissions that are applicable to the project that we're working on. The other thing that we have to do is the transportation demand management program, which we have to have reviewed prior to the certificate of occupancy. As you may remember, we have done a system-wide use permit that we're just putting into place for this fall, where we will have two use permits, two TDM requirements, one for a large project that has a use permit, and for the smaller projects where we have some elements of the transportation demand management. But all of that is defined in the project. We also agreed to do LEED Silver, or LEED Silver is what we are shooting for on our project. And generally includes any of the MOUs or MOAs that we have for the project are also included in the use permit. Here we've gotten to 44 items. Again, we were up to 89 on items prior to this. So we have made some great progress working with the county on our use permit and making it more manageable and usable and user-friendly. And we continue to work that direction, and we'll continue to work that direction, and we will work to make as many improvements to this as we move forward on future projects. But I think our last step was huge, that our starting point is a lot less onerous than it was 2 years ago.
Jeff, thank you. There's a number of questions in the chat if you want to take a quick look at and
Sure.
Respond to. And Lisa partially responded to it.
Okay. What needs to be done in the future to help the process? I think support from the FAC is always helpful. And we will share with you any issues and concerns that we have as we move forward. It's always interesting to go through the process. I think I've been through 4 or 5 at this point. So I think community support, essentially one of the things that I think the other thing is to help us avoid creep, because I think our use permits, if you go back long before I got here and you look at what our use permit requirements were just a couple of pages, and then they continue to grow with special interest. So we need to try to make sure that we continue to rein in the special interest and make sure that it's what's good for the county and the overall process, and not ending up costing APS money because they're requiring us to do things just because it would be nice to have. Have to haves we don't have a problem with. Nice to haves we would like to have if we can afford it. But it's just like, for instance, at the Reed project, if we did a cost estimate and to underground one section of McKinley Road to 18th Street would have cost about $1 million, and which is why they allowed us not to do the undergrounding at that location. And I think part of it is because part of that property is county property, and they would have had to underground too. Anyway, another question from David Goodman is, are we talking about use permits in general or any one specific use permit? I am speaking in general terms at this point in time. And the question with regard to the boilerplate language is that's what we worked on before we started the Reed project, and we're able to reduce it in about half of what it used to be. And Lisa's bringing up the point that we're the only use group in the county required to do the use permit. Lover Run Aquatic Center and other county facilities developed by right. County staff suggested we ask for this to get removed. And again, I think one of the things, Lisa, that I said is some of it does benefit us. For instance, height, setback, and parking requirements are all modified by use permit. If we didn't have that, then we would have to still go through the county board process if we wanted to go for a variance. So I think from that standpoint, and we fought hard to get that included because we wanted to provide the appropriate facility setback and height for where we were putting our buildings with the S3A zoning area. Any other questions, comments, concerns?
A couple of questions that were just added. Presumably the school board would be the entity to request the county board to remove the requirement?
Yes, it would. The county board is the one who requires the change. It would have to be a request. It would have to be a zoning change, I believe. So it would have to be a full-blown modification.
Okay. And then another member asked, is it required that this be renewed or revised every so often, the use permit?
No, the use permit is actually for the life of the building. So it actually contains conditions for the construction and or the operation and the ongoing monitoring of it. Like I said, we did just modify the TDM requirement. So a lot of the ongoing monitoring, traffic counts and whatnot that we used to do, or not traffic counts, the reporting that we had to do with regarding to transportation demand management, we have it now written that we are able to utilize existing counting measures like APS Go and the things that we already did because the requirement was more onerous and was providing information that was not useful.
I think that answers all the questions out there. Lisa chimed in on a couple too. I think I may have actually duplicated it. So thank you. Chip has his hand up. Chip?
Yeah, sorry, I had to kind of step in and out here, and if I missed this, I really apologize. But what is this? Does this use permit process, does this drive, for instance, capacity in the schools and like what the limits are, for instance? So, I don't know, take a school that was built a while ago, and it was built for X amount of kids, and due to growth and so forth, it's now got a lot more kids in it. Does the use permit affect that? What I'm just curious, what governs that? The scenario I mentioned where, again, you build a school and it was built or intended for a certain amount of kids, and it no longer obviously can accommodate, or it kind of outlives its useful life for that amount of kids. What governs that?
Basically, we govern how many kids go into a facility, but if we make a major alteration to a project and add, make a huge addition or an addition, it would require an amendment to the use permit. So we would have to apply and go through the process for a major construction project, such as Abingdon, for instance. We ended up having to get a use permit for that because it didn't have one before. So essentially, as we improve our facilities, every facility will have a use permit. When we make a change on the site that differs from the drawings that this use permit is modified or based on, like if we want to cut down all the trees on the site, and not replace them, we would have to go for an amendment to the use permit. And some of those things will be interpreted by zoning as to whether it's an amendment, excuse me, which goes in front of the county board, or an administrative change where the administration, the county administration can accept or reject what we're doing. So for minor things, they can accept, do an administrative change. For major things, we would have to do an amendment.
Okay, so it doesn't sound, so this only kicks in when there's construction or renovation. So.
Correct. And one of the nice things about this is we basically have to provide backup information for everything. So if you go into any of our use permits, excuse me, you'll see the transportation multimodal studies that are in here. So, and all of the drawings, or not all of the drawings that we have prepared at that point in time. So all of that information gets documented in the use permit. So it's actually a good reference to have when you go for an amendment, or you know, you have to go back and make a major change to the building. So it gives you a good reference point. So from that standpoint, the documentation is excellent with regard to the use permit. What we used to have the issue and the problem was when they make a requirement that costs us, you know, $1 million, such as undergrounding or having to build things into the project that we didn't anticipate. That's where we add costs to the project. So those are the issues and the concerns where we would want FAC support to, you know, why are we doing this? What is the reason for this? You know, so, but really when we get into the issues of parking and setback and height, it's really a benefit to us, has been a benefit and a cost savings generally, because the county wants us to build less parking than we want to build, for instance.
Right. So would this apply to, if you were to say, I think it was presented to this group at one point, but it was presented at Wakefield, for instance, the high school needs, you know, trailers or what have you, relocatables to handle enrollment. Do you have to go through the use permit process to do that? I would assume you do, correct?
We do. Actually, they've streamlined that a little bit. If they're only going to be there, it's, I forget what the term is. I think if it's 3 years, we don't have we can do it as an administrative change. And I think that with one term of renewal, so it's like 5 or 6 years, we can have relocatables without doing an amendment to the use permit.
Okay.
So when they're truly temporary, they're temporary.
Okay.
Michael, I saw you popped your hand up. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we can, all that's referenced, Chip, in the facility optimization study when we went through the amendment process with the county. And Jeff was right on when he said it's an administrative change that takes place with a 3 to 6 year cycle before it gets actually then the thing is, Chip, the county board has final say on all of this, correct? So let's say we get administrative review for those processes, 3 years, then we get another one for another 3 years, making it 6 years, and then it has to go before the county board again. County board has the option at that point to just go ahead and accept it, or they could deny it. I mean, again, they're the ultimate, you know, say for a lot of this stuff, and I don't think that Jeff really kind of wants to get into some of those details of the use permit and how the county can waive certain sort of requirements or lessen what we need for when it comes to parking or when it comes to the TDMs. But it has been somewhat of a of a surprise most of the times, because the county board usually has the school board's interest in mind.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
The last couple of items will be the annual report, which I think I present, I think it's June 24th to the board, and then the CIP. So Colleen and I will discuss the annual report. In my view, I think we've talked about the main points that I think I've heard that we would like to make. The 3 being basically that the CIP process is ripe for improvement, I think. This is a very truncated, rapid process, and I think, in my view, and I think in many view, not conducive to making good decisions. Now, we have certain constraints. You know, we get, for example, revenue numbers from the county. I'm talking about a normal year. I'm not even talking about this year. I'm talking about what happened prior. we get revenue numbers from the county in the spring, and from that you derive your debt capacity. So it doesn't leave us much time to really figure out what's available in a 10-year looking forward CIP. So we usually end up, along with the budget process, with a 6 to 8 week sprint. And I think there are some ways that that can be extended, some reasonable things that can be done. That's one point. Another point is what I've called transparency, and that's part of it, i.e., are we fully accounting for all the costs associated with certain items, whether it's transportation costs associated with a program, option schools, and other things that maybe we're not fully accounting for. But related to this, and it's not really transparency, it really gets to use of the advisory councils. And FAC, for example, in my experience over the years, we've gotten information a little bit late. And I think the impression is sometimes the decision's been made before we get a chance really to help weigh in. And I don't blame that on staff. I've heard a lot of times staff saying, well, we need to bring this to the board before we bring this to you for consideration. And there's reasons for that. But what I'd say to the board is, if that's how they want to proceed, that's one thing. But if they really want to utilize the advisory councils, FAC, BAC, and others, I'd recommend a different approach where hopefully there's some comfort in staff actually bringing things to the advisory councils earlier, allowing us to be a sanity check, put up trial balloons, think of some creative ideas that we can give some useful input on, and then it goes later in the and then it goes forward in the process. So that's kind of a second point. I've heard many of you, and I share some of those frustrations that were brought in. It'd be great to be brought in earlier. I think we could have more impact. And quite frankly, if I were a board member, I would want a little bit of a review by members of FAC or BAC, maybe before it comes to my attention as a board member. So that's two. And then third is the CIP itself, the various items. And I think I'll hold that for a second because we'll get into that at the very end. And I'll see Colleen, I think, has some additional thoughts for the year-end report.
No, I mean, and this is, coming from a short timer, but I think in terms of the way that the FAC can be used, I think the FAC should be getting ready to provide strong guidance on the hard decisions the county and APS are going to have to make. Everything going forward is challenging. We've said it 1,000 times, we have limited land, we have limited dollars, but what we really need to be able to do is to have those difficult conversations and make a decision and then move forward. And how can the FAC play a strong role in that? And I think there are things that the FAC can do in terms of looking at option programs, providing staff with that feedback and support on how do we cite option programs, how can we make those decisions, and give the support needed in advance so that when decisions have to be made about changes, that the FAC can really be there. And if I were going to look forward to next year, I think that's a role that the FAC could play very strongly.
Thank you. Another thing I'd add maybe as a year-end report is those who've known me for a few years know I've been involved in the MCMM process, which I think is really a very good one, much better than other organizations I've seen. And it served us well, it served the community and the students well. My fears have been a little bit met over the past couple of years because with COVID and the budget issues, we've reduced MCMM funding. And because we've been so good about it for about a decade, we've had some ability to basically reduce funding for other needs. But I think we're doing it for a second year in a row. And we're going to start getting into real issues if we keep doing that. So I strongly encourage us to fully fund MCMM going forward. It's hard to do. It's not the thing that gets the attention or the headlines, but just looking at, for example, the Metro, you see what happens when we don't maintain things. And I know it's nice to build a new school, but it's not as interesting, but it's actually better to maintain and to renovate the older schools that really need it. MCMM has been a piece of that, and it should be a piece of that going forward. It really needs to be brought back to full funding next year. So I guess that'll be one other kind of side point that I'd like to make, assuming FAC agrees with that. I'd like to open it up. Colleen, do you have anything else?
No, I just totally agree on MCMM. It's a penny wise, pound foolish.
Absolutely. So I'd like to open it up. Does anyone have anything? And then we'll get to the CIP right after this, but is there anything on kind of those points or any additional points I failed to raise or other viewpoints on anything, please? Okay. Well, go ahead.
John, actually, one other element I wanted to mention I failed to is as we look at how to improve and evolve the CIP process, I do think that there is a greater need for stronger alignment with the county CIP and the county growth and decisions, because every decision that is made at the county level is impacting APS and it's impacting the number of students coming into schools, and it's impacting where we can build and how and what we can do.
So I agree completely, and here's a great example. So I know, Jeff, by the way, someone asked what MCMM is. I'm sorry. It's minor construction, major maintenance. It's in the operating budget. It's been funded in past years at about 6 to 7 million. It pays for new gymnasium floors, painting, kind of major painting. Not the major additions, but some of the bigger ticket items that are beyond just a something in someone in the school doing that. It is separate from, and it's very confusing. At least I found it confusing. It is separate from what's it called, major infrastructure, which are the roofs and the HVAC renovations. And that is part of the CIP. And that by coincidence is about the same amount. It's about 6 to 7 million, but that is funded out of CIP. Sorry, I should have said that. MCMM and then major infrastructure. Major infrastructure we'll talk about at least briefly when we get to the CIP in a minute. But what Colleen said about greater cooperation with the county, I remember John Chadwick when he was with us and many in staff. When I first came in, it's clear that the county and APS are working better together. I mean, I was amazed at how little coordination there was prior to this, and partially because maybe we didn't need to as much, and now we do need to coordinate better, and we are. And there were times when staff is working with the county and careful to work productively with them, but didn't want to push too hard because it takes time for both groups to kind of work this out. But sometimes there was maybe an opportunity where FAC could say something easier for us to say and safer for us to say than for APS staff. If they're frustrated about a use permit issue, they don't want to basically impact their relationships with the county, but maybe that's an area where FAC can say, hey, we need to look at this. So that's an example of maybe where FAC can continue to push for maybe even creative ways to help coordination and planning. I just don't think Arlington taxpayers have any patience for the county and APS pointing fingers at each other and saying, well, it's their fault, we didn't coordinate. We need to coordinate. We need to plan better. It all comes out of one pot of money. Personally, I think APS should be getting, and I think it has been a bit higher priority in the county view, because in my view, education drives this county, Arlington County. So there has been progress. There's a lot more to do. And I see some hands raised. So let's go to Cynthia first and then Chip. Cynthia?
Oh, sorry, I was talking and anyway, sorry. I think what I was going to say was addressed in the chat and but Colleen, I just want to go back to if what you were saying was this issue of you know, the new housing units and blah, 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 and no one's talking about where will all the kids go to school, right? I just wanted to absolutely agree with you. So I'm turning the mic back.
You? Chip?
Yeah, so I just, you know, I probably concurred, John, and Colleen with a number of things that have already been said. I mean, you know, I think one of the things that really needs to be looked at kind of moving forward is just the opportunity cost of doing obviously something like a career center project due to the just cost associated with it and the ripple effect it has kind of on limiting us to do many things that are probably needed, and frankly what maybe some even on this committee, and I will bring myself to say are in much dire greater need than building a new career center. And so we don't seem to be looking at those things in full, in total, or at least if it's done, we don't know about it and we don't have a chance to fully discuss it. We all live in the neighborhoods and in the schools that are affected by this. And I feel that sometimes our voices are not really, even though we're here every month participating and trying to give counsel and trying to give advice, I just don't hear it being heard, frankly, and much that is then put forward. And so, you know, it's pretty stark to think about that APS and the school board is potentially moving forward with a CIP that, as you shared, John, in that work session, that the majority of the FAC does not think is appropriate at this time, or at least simply wants a pause, right? And I think that needs to be truly put out there that we have major reservations about where we are going with this project and the dollars that are being spent. And I think it all needs to be frankly looked through the lens of equity. I don't think that's being done right now. I don't think there's even an understanding of what Option Schools does to certain neighborhood schools, particularly in South Arlington. I think there's a look or a feel that the neighborhood schools probably aren't as good for whatever reason that may be, whether it's they're too crowded, whether they're older facilities, whatever it is, right? And you put a shiny new object in the middle of a neighborhood, well, guess what's going to happen? Of course, more people are going to start applying and want to go to those schools. And so I don't even think that's a consideration when we talk about things. So I just think there's major reform and discussion that's needed. And again, I hope whoever's involved next year can really do that. So I just felt that needed to be stated.
Thank you. Anything before we move on to the CIP itself, like anything on the other items, whether it's coordination, MCMM, transparency, FAC involvement, anything else? Okay. Well, I think some of it will get tied into the CIP discussion. So I think we can start with that now. So I did send to the board, and I've spoken to some board members, some staff, community members, and I did send you all a summary of, I think, what I've heard from FAC, a majority view, and I think a strong majority view, and I've said at the working session. And I've tried to be as clear and productive as possible. And, you know, we all know that the one project is the one, the Career Center is the big gorilla in the room that kind of gets the attention. But again, I just want to repeat, the FAC, I think, has played a positive role. We have looked at many of the projects that are proposed and we fully support them. Whether it's the security vestibules, the kitchens. I think we worked through some of the confusion. Remember a year ago, the question was, well, why are we expanding kitchens? And we've worked with staff to explain why kitchens. I'd like to really appreciate something Lisa did. She mentioned this many months ago to put this on my radar screen as chair, that this kitchens was going to be something that the view was needed attention. And I can say that helped me work through this with FAC to support this in the CIP. But bringing that on the radar screen was a big help. And that's why I say the earlier we can bring it to FAC, the better it helps us to help. So anyway, kitchens, security vestibules, the fields, joint fields with county, the major infrastructure I mentioned earlier, and I've mentioned to a number of people, we need to be clear on that. And I put down the email. Let's just be clear what that major infrastructure is. It's spending for roofs and HVACs, and it is replacing and renovating HVAC systems over a life cycle of decades. And it's basically what we're proposing is simply a continuation of what we were planning to do prior to COVID. Air quality is being handled through the purifiers put in the rooms. And I don't personally put a value to that, but I'm saying I do encourage APS to be clear on exactly what that means. Because some of the material I see on major infrastructure, I think inadvertently gives the impression that we're doing something more or more aggressively, and that's not the case. So we just need to be clear on that. And I think there'll be some members of the community that will not be happy with that, but we can't please everybody. But at the very least, I do think we need to be clear on exactly what major infrastructure is, what it's doing, and what's not doing. It's basically continuing as we previously planned. That's one thing. The heights is another one that I don't think. Members can tell me to think differently, but the feedback I've gotten to date is I don't think we have a strong view. We don't have a majority view one way or another. Partially, and so I come out with partially again, this is a project that needs to be better explained. A year and a half ago, it was kind of discussed as a parking issue, $12 million for 75 parking spots, or whatever, and there was a big pushback against that. As I understand that there are other considerations here, including water issues and accessibility, and parking and fields are another. So again, APS, I think, would do itself a great service to be very clear on what the project is and what the marginal costs are. That this isn't necessarily $12 million. Kathy, maybe you want to speak up? Sorry, maybe hand raised.
I actually wanted to speak to the major infrastructure
Sure.
topic that you covered. So
Sure.
I agree that our approach to major infrastructure is similar to what we've done in the past. Is we're really looking at a comprehensive replacement of major HVAC equipment along with roofs. Really looking at the roofs, as JFAC had said, with the recommendation to see if we have opportunities to make them solar ready. So that's what we're going to do with infrastructure. But with regards to HVAC, I think this last year has really informed us on the better approach to major infrastructure, and not to replace like for like in terms of our replacement strategy, but to really, when we have an infrastructure that's coming up, HVAC system, comprehensive replacement that's coming up, to look at the complete picture of ventilation, filtration, in addition to the type of heating, ventilation, and cooling equipment that's needed to be replaced, because that was what was critical and what was brought up during the study this year.
So let me ask you that. How will that impact costs? Because the budget proposals do not increase the spending for major infrastructure other than for inflation.
Right. So, and as you saw from those 19 studies, the cost is substantial, even if we just focus on filtration and increased ventilation. So that's why we really need to look closely with this infrastructure, as well as kind of the HVAC funding that we have available right now, into terms of how we can go forward, really tackling our older schools, but also providing the best possible solutions to as many schools as possible. And that's not going to be easy. So that's why we're continuing to look at it. And for the short term, while we have these portable units available, we also want to look at our larger spaces, right? Our cafeterias, our gymnasiums. You know, are there opportunities there where we have single units we could replace, you know, in kind, but then we could increase the ventilation and filtration. So that really, I think the study really helped us inform us in terms of how we proceed that way.
So is it safe to say that the 7 million plus what we're putting in per year as a placeholder, for lack of a better term, will be insufficient to do kind of what we're talking about in terms?
It may not be insufficient to tackle some of our larger spaces like cafeterias and gymnasiums when they have, you know, single units that supply that whole space.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Jim has really been working on, as well as working with vendors, you know, that have reached out to us with portable units for even larger spaces, right? We took care of the classrooms, which was great, but we need to really focus on these larger spaces as, you know, people are coming in full time in the fall. You know, do we have good solutions for, you know, our cafeterias and things like that?
But what about what you said about the HVAC systems, the replacement of some of the schools that need it more than others? It looks to me like there's not sufficient funding for that.
Not for this CIP. That's why we want to look at it more comprehensively and robustly. So what I want to add to is, I know the Career Center is a concern because it's a substantial project. And the committee and yourself have made really good points on that. As we considered the CIP and we looked at all the 19 HVAC studies, there was an opportunity. You know, the Career Center has always been on John Chadwick's plate in terms of how do we go forward, how do we right size that facility to offer the amenities those students need. Well, it shares the campus with MPSA. MPSA moved into a building that is one of the toughest buildings right now during the ventilation study and needs one of the most work. So that offered us an opportunity, right? If we built a new Career Center and moved MPSA over to the existing Career Center, which has better ventilation and filtration opportunities, it tackles one of our harder buildings that we needed to look at in terms of a comprehensive HVAC study.
Okay. How many, well, go ahead, Chip, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I had one question originally, but then, you know, so this is first and foremost, this is again is new information to us, right? You know, what I didn't know that this was one of the reasons why you decided to do Montessori first, for instance, over, I don't know, another elementary school like Barcroft that I've heard that really is in not so great a shape, or some others that are out there, right? So again, I think this just kind of shows what the issue and what the problem is kind of with this whole process. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention too about these air purifiers and filters is I don't even think we can speak in good confidence that they're being deployed correctly. And that's just a whole other issue, that human error in this process. So, and again, the only way we can speak to it is through our own kids that are in these schools, but the air purifier in my daughter's classroom is in the far corner and in the wrong location. And we've mentioned that to the principal multiple times. So I don't know what facilities, frankly, is doing to truly kind of, what are their procedures to make sure someone is going in and auditing to make sure they are in the right locations and they are being deployed properly? Because again, we're saying that these filters are now the fix, again, until we can do more. but if they're not deployed properly, they're not the fix, right? So you've got that kind of temporary issue. And then again, in the bigger picture, I think what I'd like to see as a member is, where is that analysis? Why does Montessori go before these others, right? Why are they first? And I just want that explained to me as a member. And if it's legitimate, then fine, right? So I think that just, again, hasn't been truly fleshed out.
So please remind me, because I know I did not always participate in FAC, but was the study for the 19 facilities shared with FAC in terms of costs and kind of time frame from the consultant study?
I mean, I think it was shared at a high level and said, here, this is where it is on the website, I think, but I don't know.
But I believe the schools were listed kind of in priority order in terms of, like, these are the schools that have to be looked at within the next 1 to 5 years. And then they were organized that the next ones are like 6 to 10 years. So did the committee have the opportunity to take a look at that?
I don't know. John, I mean, did we get a full briefing on that? I don't remember.
Okay, the information was shared with the group, just like we share information typically with the group. If it's discussed during a meeting, we try to get it out to the group immediately afterwards if they're not privy to it before. If the information is available before, then we try to send it out prior. This was one of those instances, I believe, where we sent it out because it was presented to the school board. But this was last year, right?
Okay, a while ago. Okay.
So, I mean, we have to think about that. This is something that's, I'm trying to remember now. I have to go back and look to see when we actually shared this information. But yeah, it's been a while for everyone. So, you know, it's not, you know, it's no one's fault that they just can't remember all the stuff. I can't remember half of the stuff that we talk about, I feel like. So, I'll give it back to Kathy.
I just kind of wanted to share, you know, the major infrastructure, John, because you have always supported, you know, MCMM and major infrastructure. So I just wanted to kind of also add to that in terms of how we are going to approach it. So.
No, thank you. But I mean, you raise a good point. I can't remember exactly how much the two that were done since I've been here were Gunston and Randolph. And they, you know, just give an idea of how large these projects are. This was before COVID. This was long planned and done before COVID. The 2 summers is when the work takes place, over 2 summers. And it was multi-million dollars. I can't remember, $4 million each, something along those lines. I may be off by quite a bit. 6 million? Am I in the right ballpark?
Yeah, I think it was a little bit more than that, and I could verify that. I'd have to look that up again. So. Okay.
So we're talking.
And it does take more time. It can't be done in one summer, like you said.
Yes.
So.
Yes, it takes multiple summers because you're not working on that when the kids are there, but you're talking about also improved ventilation too inside the schools, which is even more. So I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but you know, on the one hand, the Career Center could be a way to help with one school, but I must say, on the other hand, it's going to cannibalize our ability to deal with those other schools that need it as much as the Montessori school, just because opportunity cost, money spent there will not be available for other schools. And we're talking, and I do remember these numbers from, we do have some numbers more recently from you all. It's multi-millions. It's tens of millions to do this. So we just got to keep that in mind. And Career Center is very emotional for a lot of people, but I you know, I just stress, we have to think about opportunity cost. Money spent on one project, no matter what it is, will mean money not spent on other projects. So we need to be careful about that. So So anyway, other hands are up. Colleen, then Jeff. Actually, I'm sorry, Cynthia first, then Colleen, and then Jeff.
Okay, so I'm confused. I joined the committee this year, so I didn't get this list that has been talked about, and I joined with Chip. So this is new news for me about the reason why we would do more work on the Career Center than, your comments, John, were suggesting. And so I just wonder, however, you came back, John, and said, the whole opportunity cost. So if we do this thing at the Career Center, I mean, there's other things we don't. Maybe my question is for you, Kathy. So is the Montessori, the worst off in the county? I mean, where is it on your list of priority things before we go back to John and say, John, well, maybe we should revisit how much we want done at the Career Center. I would think that we wouldn't want to spend a whole bunch of money on fixing the Montessori, the old Patrick Henry School, if eventually, if we're just going to move to another location and we don't need to do that.
Right. So that's why I apologize. I don't know when this report was done, but when CMTA did a more in-depth study of the 19 facilities where we felt like we really needed to look at their ventilation and filtration needs, they came up with a list of the schools. They did a deep dive, and they estimated the cost, and they separated it. They did a great job in terms of how much would it be to upgrade the ventilation only, how much it would be to increase the filtration, and what is that total package. And they also prioritized it based on which schools had the greatest needs. Like they should be looked at within 1 to 5 years, if possible, or 6 to 10 years, etc. So MPSA, it's a smaller building. It's one of the schools that, the equipment is just, not great. And so it was number 3 on that list at a cost of $14 million total for both improved ventilation and increased filtration. So if you look at these schools, and John was, I think when people were looking at these reports, these were big, substantial numbers. Yes. And it was only to increase ventilation and improve filtration, right? It didn't even talk about replacing your overall comprehensive heating, ventilation, and cooling equipment. So I think when we looked at this list, we're like, wow, that's a substantial list. How do we tackle this? Knowing that we only had a 3-year CIP, knowing that we wanted to serve as many schools as possible. So it was hard. And so when there was talk about, looking again at the Career Center and what the next steps were, because we had put a pause on it, I think the desire was, can we do the Career Center and what opportunities are there? So it's not like we said, oh, because MPSA, it was an opportunity, right? MPSA shares the same campus as the Career Center. So we looked at it as an opportunity. They needed a lot of work for HVAC, over $14 million. So is that an opportunity? It's not like we prioritized them first. It's that we looked at the study to help inform us. And then, when there was a desire to revisit the Career Center, that's how we looked at it. But we're not disagreeing with your approach or your sentiments. I think I've always been on the maintenance side. So I strongly understand that. These are just hard choices. So.
Thank you.
So John, I'm sorry, I just have to go back. So John, does that further explanation suggest to you at all that what we're saying about the Career Center should be modified, should be anything? Now that we're revisiting a little bit about this, the need or why they made that recommendation. The Career Center itself is this huge project, and I support your position that we don't have to do everything at once, right? So there are some things that legitimately, to ease our way forward. But so hearing this information, does that suggest to you, because again, I'm a new member, so I
By itself, I'd say no, because there has been talk of basically getting out of that building ever since I've been on FAC. It is a inefficient, suboptimal building that houses Montessori. The problem has been, and this is kind of where I talk about opportunity costs, direction we were moving in last year pre-COVID to solve this problem among elementary schools was to get swing space and to basically vacate a number of elementary schools for 15 months at a time and completely renovate a number of schools. The smaller, more crowded, older schools, mainly along Western Columbia Pike. And the problem is we never could do it without swing space, but we were moving because we thought we'd have sufficient debt capacity to do that. But we, at this point, post-COVID, don't look like we will have the ability to do something like that. So what I come back to is that's one piece of many items. So we still have some time to talk about, you know, whether FAC members' views change for this or for other things we talk about in the next few minutes. But to me, that's one piece. We've always wanted to get out of that building. The question is how. Now, Career Center option could be a great way to do it. And what I keep coming back to is, I'm not saying, I don't think FAC is saying no, never. I mean, this may end up being the way to go, or something similar to it may be a way to go. But I believe most FAC members, and I certainly believe that at this point, to fully bless this would be very premature for many of the reasons we've talked about, with so many things uncertain and so many other needs. But I want other people to please weigh in and, you know, with their views. And you have my word. If I hear from a majority of FAC or all of FAC that they want to move forward on the Career Center fully at this time, that will be my message as chair. My job is to basically speak for FAC, not for myself. So I am trying to convey what I think the majority is saying. And I do point out that our minority views. I don't just say, here's where FAC stands. I say, here's a majority view, there are other views here. So I'd rather, instead of me talking, I'd rather hear from more of our colleagues. So Colleen, then Jeff, and then Steve.
Sure. So, you know, I served on the Career Center working group, so I've been sitting with the idea of what can be done at this space for a long time now. And John, you know, when we first heard this plan from Jeff and Lisa, you know, the comment I made was, this is what should have come out of the Career Center working group. This is what that group should have envisioned, but instead it got bogged down in just a couple niche issues that didn't advance the issue at all. And it wasted a lot of time. And so the thing I wanted to talk about is, let's not waste more time, because every year that we wait on these projects, it's construction escalation costs. So, you know, 3 to 5% added on to a project every year that we wait. And we are continuing to see schools grow in capacity, even in the pandemic. I mean, you look at the 6th, 7th, or the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade right now, those class sizes are bigger than 10th, 11th, 12th. And that's enrollment. That's not projections. That's right now students in our schools. And it's the same thing for 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And, you know, it's concentrated in different parts of the county, and it's concentrated a lot at Gunston. And one thing I've been looking at as we've been talking about this, because it really is, it's a pressing need for our neighborhood, right where I live. And I've looked at the student generation factors year over year and how they've changed. The student generation factor for market rate apartment buildings for Gunston has increased 26% year over year. And so if you continue to see a rise in students coming out of apartments at a time When JBG just told us they're going to put 2,000 more apartments in Crystal City, you're going to spell disaster. And we need to have a plan for those students. So I understand that we don't have all of the information that we would want, but I do think it's a good idea to move this forward because I think there are students who are going to need it for sure.
Thank you. Jeff? Jeff?
Okay, all I wanted to do is one of the things that came out of the numbers with the HVAC study was the fact that if we lined all these projects up just because of the physical nature of what we have to do, you know, a couple summers per building, et cetera, dealing with the filtration and the air quality, the ventilation made a lot of sense because we can actually address all of the schools at one time so that all of our schools would be taken care of from a ventilation and filtration system at one time. If we did it one building at a time with complete renovations and replacement, some schools would not get touched for 15 years, you know, and I think that some of our less performing schools may not be our oldest schools. So we had to look at things as to ventilation rates and how they were working. And we also looked at ages of systems. So this allows us to take care of all schools at one time and improve ventilation and filtration, and then address the life cycle of our systems and replace them as they get to the end of their useful life. So we are not wasting useful life in systems that we would be if we just went in, because we would probably, if it was just the air quality issue, we would be going in and replacing some newer buildings versus some older buildings that probably need it worse, you know, from the standpoint of they are getting the end of their useful life, but they have decent ventilation. if that makes any sense. I just wanted to throw that out. It's a really difficult puzzle. So that's all I want.
Thank you. Steve and then Michael.
Hey all. I had a couple of comments and then I'll just sign off and allow other people to comment on mine. The first thing related to HVAC, you know, I generally agree with all the comments made to this point, but I am concerned I haven't heard any comments related to efficiency, and that's what I mean, specific energy efficiency. And I just note that, you know, a report came out today that global carbon levels hit 419 parts per million last May, which is, you know, global record, and we need to get to global zero inside the lifespan of many of these systems. So if we are not considering efficiency now, there's a good chance that we're going to have to replace the system in 5 to 10 years. Related to the kitchens, I agree that I appreciate the comments in the letter related to prioritizing that. I'd like to see it go a little bit further. We talked about specifically the 5 Title I schools, trying to get them in even earlier. I'd like to try and get them all in funded in the next fiscal year. So the 3 other schools, we can, you know, delay those a little bit, but those first 5 we really need to get done right away. In terms of the parking garage at the Heights building, I'm opposed to that, not because of what it is. I think all the goals are laudable, but as we talked about opportunity costs, that's approximately $10 to $15 million that may need to be put somewhere else in the system. And I don't think that we should make that prioritization now. I think we need to wait until we get more numbers specifically on the Career Center to decide if we're going to need to have additional funds. And that goes into my final comment about the Career Center is I'm very much torn. I agree with Colleen that we urgently need these seats. I'm very concerned that we think that we're going to be able to build the Career Center now for under budget when it didn't come through last time. But I'm also concerned that we didn't do a complete analysis of alternatives. So we're in a bit of a very tight spot here, a rock and a hard place. I I really would have liked to see some additional analysis, specifically looking at perhaps a new build at the Virginia Hospital site. Wasn't even considered. It was briefly considered for some things at Kenmore. I know there's limitations there as well. But when we talked about like the 1,300 seats process, for example, that was a big, long search. And sure, we can leverage some of that information, but I think we owe it to the community, if we're going to spend roughly $200 million, that we truly understand that we're getting the best bang for the buck. And then my last comment related to Montessori is, I just note that we spent $2 million roughly just to refresh the school when Patrick Henry moved out, and now we're talking about essentially tearing it down. So I would just argue that we really need to get good long-term planning before we make investments so that we're not throwing money away.
Thank you. Michael?
Sorry, I have salad in my mouth. I think that Kathy was going to say something about efficiencies, and then just let me finish eating this real quick. Is that right, Kathy?
Sure.
Sure, I'll talk about efficiencies. So yes, I think you're right. We always consider efficiency, energy efficiency, when we look at this equipment. I think I would, have a note in terms of what this pandemic has taught us is that efficiency is important, but when you increase ventilation and enhance filtration, there is an energy cost to it. And it's something that we need to look closely at, because it's not we have to look at it overall, because an energy cost, yes, but it's a better energy cost than keeping our schools closed, right? And that is really what's the dialogue that's been in our country right now in terms of how schools can improve their infrastructure, the ventilation, the increased filtration, and is there an energy cost? Yes, but is that a benefit to the schools? And that's I think that's what informs us, right? That's why we did that study as we do tackle these infrastructure projects, is we need to be smarter about it going forward. But I agree with you, we will always look at energy efficiency as it, looks at the overall project. So thank you.
All right, thanks, Kathy. So there was just a couple things I wanted to say. Steve sort of hit on, and I was in the background doing some stuff at the same time when we sort of shared that information. The original ventilation information was shared back in September, okay, of 2020. And then when they sent out another revised one that took place in March officially, but we shared as part of the CIP project updates that Jeff usually shares with the group. That was the meetings of January and February. And during that time, we sent out an Excel table to the group that lists all the schools that were identified in the study that needed to that came to the top as being like, these are the schools that that the consultant identified as priorities. And then from there, what made me think about all this was what Steve said about the title schools. And then from that list, then we broke it down even further, and we said to the group that of those that are included, these are the schools that are title schools that meet a certain criteria based on their free and reduced lunch. So that's one thing. The other thing that I wanted to sort of get around was I thought I heard Colleen say something about student generation factors for the Pentagon City, Crystal City, and did she say something like that? And if she did, could she just repeat it? Because I think I might have been a mid-chew. Thank you.
Yeah, Michael, what I was saying about student generation factors is I looked at the year-over-year student generation factors from fall 2019 to the ones that were updated in 2020. And I looked at the number of students that were coming from market rate elevator apartments for Gunston, Oak Ridge, and Wakefield. And I looked at the rate of increase, and every single one of them saw a rate of increase this year. And for Gunston specifically, it increased 26%. Just the percentage of additional students that were going to Gunston from market rate apartment. Gotcha.
And then do you recall what because I can't recall. I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of brain issue tonight. I can't recall what the actual student generation for market condo elevator would be, but
I can send you the links for what I used.
Okay, all right, cool, thank you.
Chip?
Yeah, I've got, I think a general question of how the, proposal at the Career Center with both the combination of Montessori middle school seats and middle school seats for the Career Center is truly actually going to relieve our other middle schools. And the reason I say truly is because, again, if you're building, say, 200 Montessori seats at the Career Center location and pulling 200 from Gunston, and Colleen will probably know this best, what does that 200 do to Gunston now and in the future with the projections, right? With the numbers you just kind of read off, or does 200 really even make a dent, frankly, right? And then what's also going to happen, how is this all going to work with the middle school boundary process that's coming up this fall, where, again, in the numbers, if they're saying that the kind of northwestern schools are kind of projected to have lower populations, wouldn't, a lot of the boundary changes, from what it sounds like, are going to be having to move kids north, right? From, like, think of the two middle schools that are on 50, right? Both TJ and Kenmore. And so then what does that do to those schools in terms of free and reduced lunch and those type of things, right? Because those things, I think, again, kind of pulling back to this whole lens of equity, those are things we also need to look at. And I don't know, I haven't heard a thing on free and reduced lunch about this whole conversation, right? To see when you build kind of these brand new schools in an area that become attractive to everybody. It was the reason why Montessori had to move out of Drew, right? Montessori was causing issues with Drew. But I guess it's okay to have Montessori kind of in the middle of the Arlington Heights area where there are multiple schools, whether it's Randolph or Fleet or what have you. Fleet with an 80% free and reduced lunch rate. So where is that whole discussion in all of this? Or has that happened? Hasn't even been looked at.
Lisa's got her hand up. I don't know if it's to respond to this or something else.
So there was a lot in there, and I don't know if I'm going to respond to everything. I may forget some of the pieces as I go on. In one of our CIP questions last week, we posted all of the upcoming projects, and we've been watching middle school for a long time. When we did that last middle school process, we said that as soon as we got Dorothy Ham going, we were going to need middle school seats at some point in time, and that has not changed. What happened is the high school seats probably aren't as pressing as they were because of the Ed Center and some of the options at high school with virtual. There are some things there that actually, the high school needs that were so significant back when some of those decisions were made are not as extreme as they were at this period of time. The boundary change that we do this year probably will not be the boundary change. We'll probably have to come back 4 or 5 years after that and make another boundary change. We're waited until this year. We probably should have done Gunston beforehand, but we wanted to let those kids who got moved last time not go through another boundary change. Free and reduced lunch is looked at as part of that. I'm trying to think of all the other things that you asked in that question that I don't know if I answered. Option seats. So, with the option seats, so what we put in here is a proposal. The instructional piece could change. We wanted to give people enough of an idea that, this works. It aligns with some of that initial. It was really interesting this year in the IPP work. One of the strongest things, both internally from our instructional leaders and from the community, was support for a pre-K-8 Montessori program. And I actually think that it solves some of our pre-K issues that we've been struggling with. We've got Montessori programs in North Arlington that are not accessible to students who would qualify for the income reductions. So program that was designed for income eligibility is not accessible to the families who actually qualify. So we're not meeting our goals there. Every time we go through the annual update and we look at program needs for both pre-K and special ed, more of our needs are closer to Central South Arlington. They keep asking us, is there a way to provide those seats and, that is much more centrally located? And we've looked at different ways, and because that's where also the growth is happening, we haven't been able to do that. With pre-K, one of the things that's happening is we have child find. We identify students who are 2 and 3-year-olds who need pre-K or they need special ed services in a co-taught setting. APS pays for those students to attend a community provided pre-K, so another organization, and we provide a special ed teacher to do it. So the Montessori piece there, the efficiency there that comes from that Montessori, the pre-K satellites going there, is the possibility to actually do inclusion with 3-year-olds. Probably save some money, but also have those teachers be used in a better way with our kids on site and not across other schools. So they probably can see more students, and there's some needs we've been looking at for a long time that this actually addressed. Wendy Pilch, who's the director of of elementary education, has been asking forever, are there sites where we could find for the Montessori pre-K, because it would allow us to do a lot more of the co-teaching that right now we contract out for. And then the other piece is we need to revise the secondary options and transfers. Right now, we know we have a wait list for HB Woodlawn. I believe we will fill Arlington Tech as well. We will give a proportion of those seats very much for all the secondary programs like we do for HB Woodlawn now. A proportion goes to the feeder schools that are coming up so that, we know we're filling them from the neighborhoods that have more students. So if an elementary school has more kindergarten students, they get more, or more 5th grade students, they get more of those seats. And I don't know if I missed anything, sorry.
But do you look at, again, HB Woodlawn, what's the free and reduced lunch rate at HB Woodlawn? 10%? 15 most?
I think it's changing since we changed our options and transfer policy. It used to be, it was determined by the neighborhood school you attended, and what we would see there were kids from the Carlin Springs Elementary School, from Randolph, I can give you examples, Huff and Boston, who attended those schools, and nobody got in because ATS might have 12 kids out of 75 in a year. So when we changed it to have it from the neighborhoods, the younger population, so the 6th, 7th, and maybe the 8th graders now look much more like Arlington County than the rest of the school. It's changing slowly. It has to change as those incoming classes come in.
Yeah, and this is kind of what I'm struggling with a little bit, because again, we're saying that this is what the community wants, right? This is what the county wants. Well, if I can recall, John, when that group was speaking to the FAC, the Office of Immigration, and I may have the name wrong, right? Their main concern in their community was they wanted anchor schools that they could rely on in their communities, right? In their neighborhoods that they could get to, right? In time of crisis, which, guess what? We just had a crisis with COVID, and people are relying on their neighborhood schools right now. And so again, I'm just a little.
Let me respond to that, Chip, and then I'll respond as FAC chair, and then I'll take that off and speak on my own behalf. So you're absolutely right. And I've spoken to Marjorie in that group a number of times, and I've asked them a couple of times in the past few months if they could come up and address the committee again. So I want people to know I've asked them. They've been swamped. They've been so busy trying to get their constituency vaccinated and dealing with other things, but they have sent me some information. They've apologized for not being able to spend the time to meet with us. But that is exactly the one point I could distill from them, is the importance of neighborhood schools as critical to their community. Not an option school halfway across the county or even right next to them. Neighborhood schools so that they and their neighbors and families could jointly get the kids to and from school easily. So yes, I wanted to. I'll hand it back to you for a minute, Chip. But yes, that's you are accurate in that.
Yeah, and that's I think we're a little. We say that this is what the community wants, or that's what the community wants. But again, I don't know what type of outreach is going on to those other entities, that are certainly out there that, from what I know, most of the people that apply, or I'm sorry, write on the county website for comments are the people that have the time and are probably much more connected, right? And let's not forget, I mean, the Montessori Action Committee, that their proposal basically mimics what we are about to do, right? And that's an action committee, an advocacy group focusing on Montessori, and basically we're doing exactly what they want to be done. And so again, and if that's the best thing, if that's truly what the community wants, fine, but I don't think it's truly been investigated what the community wants. I think we are just going forward and doing what's easiest and what seems to be right because so many people have responded, or X amount of people have responded, but I think it's probably a very small minority of folks that truly look at the Career Center for the use that's being proposed right now. So.
Thank you. Anyone else want to weigh in before I say a couple things? Okay. So I want to partially address something Colleen brought up, a good point that I'd like to maybe clarify. The point of, well, if we don't build the Career Center now, or the inflation causes the cost to go up. Absolutely. But let's be clear. I'm not saying don't build anything anywhere now. I'm saying there are other priorities. I think many FAC members are saying there are other priorities. I can't say we've taken a vote on this, but I personally, that's why I'll take my FAC hat off for now, my chair hat off. I personally would much rather accelerate the kitchens and security vestibules in this 3-year CIP. Again, we're talking a 3-year CIP. We're talking about committing to a project that is well beyond that horizon. We're talking about very uncertain revenues. They could be good, they could be terrible. We're talking about a major structural deficit that I have heard very little talk about. Now, that's going to bite in the next couple of years. And any money that goes towards debt service, for whatever reasons, is going to be less money for other things we want to do. So we need to set reasonable expectations. 3-year CIP, and we're talking about, quite frankly, projections that are very uncertain, unusually uncertain. And I'll go back to just a couple of years ago, and this isn't to criticize anybody, but just a couple of years ago, we were talking about the desperate need to build 5 new elementary schools in this county. And what happened? We made one adjustment to birth rates, projected birth rates, and those 5 elementary schools disappeared, no longer a need, which was in some ways great. We didn't have to find 5 sites and 5 new elementary schools, but that was one adjustment. Now, now we are using pre-pandemic projections just to justify these seats. I don't believe those projections will be where we are, where we will end up. We will have projections in the fall. Will those projections be the be-all and end-all? No. Will they be much better than what we have now? Yes. We will have some idea of how many kids have, unfortunately, and families have left the system. I don't think any of us have any idea other than that students are leaving the system. And I'm not just talking about kindergartners, I'm talking about middle school and high school. So we don't know. We will have a much better idea in the fall, how many are leaving and how many are coming in. We'll have some idea if people are leaving the county. We will have a better idea of county revenues and how that may impact that. But, one thing I've had to do in my career is set expectations. And this doesn't sound like we as a community are having a reasonable discussion about where we stand right now. In my mind, we've got a great school system. I love it. My family and kids have benefited from it. But I'm looking at a system that if we make some decisions that absorb hundreds of millions of dollars for one project, that may be a great benefit, but may not solve problems, it's not going to allow us to do other things we may need. Moving forward on a $200 million project, and make no mistake, that's what this will be. I don't know what the projections will come out, but how many projects have come in on budget lately? We've had to spend more money on Cardinal. We had to spend more money on Fleet. We had to spend more money on the Heights, potentially, we're talking about. So, you know, there's no guarantee that even the projection will be ultimately what we need to spend on the Career Center or elsewhere. But we need to have reasonable expectations. So that's why I believe most FAC members, and I have tried to say, given all these uncertainties, moving forward on a project that was floated 2 months ago and moving full speed ahead without any ability to pull back really scares me. And I think should give anyone pause. And I'm not saying, I don't think FAC is saying no to this, and I'm trying to be careful. We're not saying no, this may end up being the project, or some subset of this may end up being the project. But to basically say full speed ahead right now after 2 months doesn't feel like we've done the due diligence. And I certainly don't think we've done the research into reasonable alternatives that can be much less costly, that actually could utilize this site much better. And little things. I know people don't like to talk about these sorts of things, but can we put more students into Ac Woodlawn? It's a brand new building. I think we can. We've put more students in plenty of other schools. At some point, it gets to be too much, but we've done it. What about Kenmore? What about small additions to other places? I keep coming back to, and again, I try to do this as I think FAC tries to do this as a service to the board and to the community, because someone will ask these questions. We're going to ask for $200 million to build a career center. Yet we have what current projections, not old projections, but current projections, post-pandemic projections show will be empty schools, elementary schools in the western part of this county. And we don't have a clear plan on what we're going to do about that. We're going to have some very difficult questions. I think some people think that we've always had bonds approved by the community, and I think it's a mistake to take that for granted. Look what happened with the trolley car and the $1 million bus stops. This can turn quickly. So I say this as trying to be helpful. I think the Career Center, we will do something at the Career Center, but to say this is the option, I think all FAC and myself, most FAC members and myself are trying to say is I'm concerned that of the train leaving the station. If we're basically asked, can we look into it more? Can we start a process, leaving ourselves flexibility to move if projections change, whether it's revenue or seat projections, then okay. I actually think that it's a good use of funds to right now consider moving Arlington High School, finding a site, leased space. We haven't talked about leased space, even though there's going to be plenty of leased space around this county. We're moving Arlington High School, demolishing Fenwick, because that makes the Career Center that much usable for whatever direction we go in. But going much further than that right now, I believe, and I believe most FAC members believe, we're not quite there. So those are my thoughts. But I do think we need to put forth reality, and it's getting lost in this. There's an opportunity cost for everything we spend money on. You know, we're not going to have money to build those elementary schools that we may need down south in South Arlington or with Lee Highway. And some blind belief that the revenues will come, I think will be a mistake. We need better than that to plan. Will there be a delay in seats? I don't know. There could be, and it's not ideal, but we're in a world that has changed dramatically, and I think we need to think about that. And we don't even, at this point, know how much the world has changed. I'd like us to find a little bit more out about that. I hope we don't have thousands of students leaving, but I'm hearing that is the case, somewhat anecdotally. Will they come back? I don't know, but I think we need a little bit better information on that. So I open it up again. Okay. Does anyone, one thing that I've heard from a couple of people are, a good use of our time would be to remaining time, not just to say not now or, let's think about this, but other alternatives that can be helpful to the board, to the community, to staff. I've kind of put forth a couple. Do others have any thoughts on other alternatives? I mean, in my mind, we do need to think more about, for example, can we fit some more students in HB Woodlawn? What would some minor projects entail at Kenmore, Gunston, other schools? What about lease spacing? We get very hung up on seats. I'd rather spend more time talking about amenities at the Career Center. Is there an opportunity for seats to be leased, and then you can focus limited resources, whether it's X millions of dollars, on other amenities at the Career Center? Virtual learning. We haven't talked at all about virtual learning tonight. If that just attracts over time a few hundred students, whether it's full-time or part-time, that can have a major impact on the margins, and that's really what we're talking about. If we don't need a certain number of seats, then we can really prioritize that funding for other needs. And I'm very pleased that our county is putting some resources behind virtual learning program and funding it at a level where we will learn more about that. So those are a few things I put forward. Chip and then David. Go ahead, Chip.
Just one of the things with alternatives that, I think I wonder about, right, is kind of the modular building approach that seems to be getting more and more discussion lately, right? These approaches, some have said that, oh, they don't apply to schools, or you can't, like hotels, I think, do it, and so, some others, there's certain entities out there that truly talk about the sustainable nature of some of these new modular kind of technologies. We're basically just stacking boxes on top of each other to put an addition on something, right? It seems to be, it is being done in other communities, and it is being done in other industries. I mean, I guess my just first question there is, you mentioned HB or the Heights. I mean, it's like, well, we're talking about building parking and building a field, well, could you first even consider modular to add 500 seats there, for instance, as an example, right? To share kind of the spaces that are the shared spaces that are already there and so forth. I mean, again, we do talk sometimes in this group about, well, we got to make sure we're not affecting instruction, right? We can't impact learning by doing that. Well, then what is the learning model at neighborhood schools that are already so packed, right? So we can't say in one vein that we can't impact the instructional models of these schools, but we know that, instruction is already being impacted at a number of neighborhood schools and so forth. But shouldn't there be kind of a little bit more of a balance, frankly, right? To say, well, are these other approaches viable? And I've asked that question before, and frankly, I don't know. I mean, again, I know other industries that look at it and work with modular approaches, but I've just never gotten that question answered. Maybe there's some folks, on FAC that know more about it than I do. So just throwing it out.
Thank you. David, then Steve, then Rosa.
Yeah, thanks, John. You your soliloquy really did hit upon a lot of really important thoughts. So I appreciate you you getting that out there, and it was all in your letter already. So that's, you've got it down on paper. Everybody here is pretty clear on it. And I think you made a lot of really useful points. Just one of those points that I find particularly interesting, I wouldn't mind following up on somehow, is the issue about leasing space. You know, the county has had, you know, we've been running what, 15, 20% office vacancies for a decade, you know. This could be the proverbial killing two birds with one stone opportunity here. Has anybody in APS staff even investigated this as an option? I know there seems to be like a natural resistance to leasing. I think maybe it's because they'd rather spend capital money than operating money, and you can't spend capital money on leasing an office space. But if we could get over this, like, well, what flavor of money are we dealing with problem? It really, it could give, not only could it solve short-term problems, both the county's office glut problem and APS's, seat space problem, but it also gives APS a huge amount of flexibility, because, you could have a 5-10 year lease, and then it could be done or whatever, it's not like you're not responsible for all that infrastructure. And because like you said, $200 million it put into the wrong hole in the ground, or put into the hole in the ground that makes sense today and is 5 years from now, it's not the right hole in the ground, but now we're married to it and now we have to finish it. There is a lot of risk in that. So I could see, some value in looking at leasing options. Now, I'm sure there's downside, maybe long term it's not as cost effective as owning your own piece of land. But maybe not. I think it may accomplish a lot of things, but we're not going to know, right now we're just speculating. So how can we go about prodding, maybe this is it, maybe we prod the board to ask staff to do that, or maybe this kind of stuff has been done already and we just need somebody to collect that information and share it with us. I don't know.
Thanks. I agree, and staff is in a little bit of a tough position where if they are looking at anything specific, they of course can't really go public with it, because then they lose leverage in any negotiations. Yeah. But yeah, other than maybe one site or a couple.
Not even like a specific property. I'm just thinking.
Yeah. No,
as a strategy, as an overall strategy.
I haven't heard enough that it has been really actively considered. I think Michael can weigh in, but go ahead, Michael, and then I'll get to a couple other people with their hands up.
Yeah, I'll just be real quick with the lease stuff. John was exactly right. We have conversations. We have an agent that we use. We are looking for space. I think I don't want to harp on the things that are obstructive to leasing, but I think it's important to point out that space, the program has to be sort of specific to what we want to go into the lease space. In other words, it would be very hard and challenging to put in let's say, an elementary school, because of all the amenities, as everyone usually calls them, common spaces that they're more typically called in this group, would have to be associated with said lease space. So I think what we need to do is we surely would like to be able to look at lease space when it comes to some programs such as adult education, or maybe some of our other programs that are offered that are like Arlington Community High School, for instance, where you have these not transitional students, but students that come in at certain set blocks of time, right? And they have a little more flexible of a schedule, so that if there was that lease option, that you would have that, and they're not necessarily offered the same sort of access to on site what you would be offered if you were at a neighborhood school. So I'll leave it at that. And I agree with David. This is something that we constantly look at, and it's not easy. I mean, I know there's stuff going on out there that no one's going to work anymore. Everyone's working from home, but it's still challenging and it's still expensive. So just keep that in mind.
I'll just add one thing on top of that. I'll say something that Barbara told me years ago, that when we're talking about relocatables and things like that, the kids are pretty flexible. It's the parents who kind of get worked up over some of these things about, well, my high school experience was X, Y, and Z, so that's what my kids want and need. And that's not necessarily the case. For some kids, yes, and my kids are very different. I can see one of them really wanting that somewhat traditional high school experience, and I can see the other one wanting something very different. So when we're talking about all these kids that have been through a year and a half, and I'm talking upper level, I'm talking high school, all these kids, a year and a half of virtual learning. Some it's been terrible for, some it's been just fine, and quite frankly, for some it's been fantastic. How many? I don't know. I'm hoping we'll find out, and that's part of this issue. You know, how many really thrived in this? And quite frankly, that's where the working world in some ways is going. For some of these professionals, the virtual tools and experiences are going to serve these kids well. So whether we're talking full-time or part-time, and if you're doing virtual, there's all different ways to do it. And it doesn't mean they're sitting at home. It doesn't mean they're sitting in a school. It could mean they're sitting in some leased space in some cases for part or all of a day. And there are various iterations that can go. Now, I believe we should be thinking about that. And I would argue putting resources towards that, which I'm glad we are, as something that can be progressive and can also help on the margins of seat needs. Again, we're, in my view, too focused on seats versus amenities. So these kids that may be high school seniors that do want to do virtual learning, my view, and I think many is, well, that's great, and they should still be able to play soccer if they want to with the high school. Kind of like the model we do have now, where they can go back to their neighborhood school for certain activities. Why can that not continue? And why can't we find lease space for these kids? I think we'll find actually more demand than maybe we would expect, but I can't say that for certain. But there is some demand for that. Steve and then Rosa.
Yeah, hey, just wanted to throw out a couple brainstorming ideas, I guess, in terms of things I would like to be explored, even if it's just kind of back of the envelope kind of conversation, but as we look to accommodate, particularly at the secondary level. So I mentioned before the Virginia Hospital site on Carlin Springs, and in my view, I think starting from a clean sheet of paper for middle school seats there would be great and probably very cost effective. And then, oh, by the way, you've got Kenmore right up the road, which is a middle school. It also happens to be the largest camp property that APS owns in the county. We could just convert that directly to a high school and then add the appropriate amenities without having to deal with the substantial increase of traffic that has been a concern with a quote school in the corner of the county. So additional, you'd be putting about 1,500 additional seats on Carlin Springs, but you are dispersing them a little bit, and it is in an area of need. I would also like to look at, if we honestly believe that projections in the northwest part of the county for elementary are going to show that we are in far excess of seats and we don't have a way to fill them, I just note that Discovery and Williamsburg are on the same campus. And so could we expand Williamsburg to become, to take over Discovery and make that into a bigger campus there and fill seats that way? I'd also like to look at the Ed Center for the option to convert those high school seats into a standalone middle school program of certain variety, depending on how the math works out for high school level. You have great flexibility and basically able to convert a building either from the middle school level up to the high school level or back and forth if you were able to add on some common spaces to it, which just provides more flexibility into the system as populations grow and or decline and different projects come online. And then the last one would be Hoffman Boston. That and the adjacent school, Drew, while we've just not been able to fully fill those schools, and Hoffman Boston in particular used to be I believe it was a middle school. They have a substantial amount of property. So is there an ability to make modest investments in there and convert that into middle school or even potentially some sort of high school seats if we're unable to create boundaries that make optimum use of all that space?
Thank you. Rosa?
Yeah, I just, I liked what Chip was mentioning about prefabricated construction. I mean, and the idea, he used the term modular, but the way in which people are using that type of construction, it's not like you have to have modules or boxes that are all the same to stack. It's anything. Any building can be prefabricated off-site and essentially dropped into place in units and stacked. So it's, I thought that was neat because that one of the issues that it solves is both the use of the site, how much layout space you have, and then also schedule, because you can be building these things, in the plant prior to, or in the shop prior to bringing them out. So a lot of times our construction, because of the schools, we don't have a lot of layout space. And then also, we have such tight schedules because you have to get it up and running by the school year start and things. So I thought that was clever. So.
But just to clarify, Rosa, are you thinking for that, especially for the Career Center site, or more generally you're talking?
I think more generally, the Career Center site, sure, but it seems like of all of the project sites that we have in our portfolio, that has the most space because it's such a big site. But yeah, it seems like, anywhere that it would be appropriate, but it could be looked at to see exactly, each project, maybe it's just something to consider instead of just doing things the same way all the time.
Thank you. Jeff?
I just wanted to throw a couple cents into the modular conversation. Modular construction works best when you're building smaller units. Doing the larger spaces of a classroom gets to be a little more complicated. It's done successfully in a lot of urban areas. For instance, New York City does a lot of their schools are done with modular construction. So it is possible. It does add to cost because you build it off site. The other issue that you have, excuse me, with modular construction is the trade inspections. You either have to send your trade inspectors to wherever the modular company is to inspect it, and then it has to come back and be plugged in together. For instance, wiring and plumbing and HVAC work and that kind of thing. And there are a lot of issues to work through with modular construction, but it's not something that's completely out of the ordinary. But generally, because of the travel costs, the moving of these units when you're doing something non-combustible, because we wouldn't be building at a relocatable unit for that kind of construction. We would be doing durable non-combustible structures like steel indoor, concrete indoor, whatever. But the New York City uses them a lot because the labor costs on site and the site constraints are the labor costs are higher than building it off-site with cheaper labor and then paying the transport costs. So that's one of the reasons why that's done that way. But yes, it's something that we've always considered and looked at. In fact, we even considered looking at modular for the third floor of the Career Center when we were looking at that. And stick-built non-combustible framing seemed to be more cost-effective, than the cost we were getting from modular companies. So yeah, we do keep that in mind. We do look at it, but again, we have to look at what the cost versus the impact is. But yeah, it's something well worth looking at. Even components that are modular and/or pre-manufactured off-site. For instance, if you in DC, you see a lot of brick and concrete and siding panels coming on a truck and lifted into place. They're modular construction that are just a facade, for instance. So yeah, we do look at that, and it's just a matter of cost effectiveness for the application.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else like to weigh in on basically the CIP, the Career Center, final report to the board? Okay. All right, Michael, just putting up the kind of the timeline of what's coming up.
Yeah, I just thought maybe that it would be helpful for the group to see that. I know it's already on the agenda, but just so everyone is aware of, how the CIP is going to be played out, and when we'll be doing our monitoring item for the year-end report.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. David, you brought up an interesting topic. Would you like to mention it?
Sure, John. Not to keep everybody too much longer, but last week I sat in on a webinar hosted by I think it was the Baltimore and DC American Institute of Architects, and ostensibly the topic was equity in school construction, and I was kind of intrigued by the topic, like, ooh, how do you, I'd never really thought of school construction as an equity issue, right? It's a bricks and mortar, right? And the people, what you do with that, is a people issue later. But one of the things that was brought up was the thing that I think the FAC might be very interested in had to do with the public-private partnership funding model that Prince George's County apparently they've just jumped in with both feet. I think they're building 6. You talked about us doing, wringing our hands over building 5 elementary schools. I think Prince George's County is now building 6 new elementary schools entirely from scratch, with public-private partnership funding. And I think they're going to be all delivered within the next 2 or 3 years. And I thought that was a crazy ambitious plan, but I was also interested in, like, how does that pencil out? Is it, it can't possibly be a free lunch, right?
Right.
So there's some trade-offs there. They didn't really talk that much about the trade-offs, but I was wondering if anybody on APS staff might have seen the webinar or has maybe a cursory familiarity with the P3 model for public schools and whether it makes any sense for us.
I'll ask staff to weigh in, but real quick, I think, if I remember correctly, that the JFAC was looking into this a bit, or is looking into this a bit. So I just wanted to raise that as something that they are the public-private partnership. I don't know if it was directly tied to equity or not, but please, Lisa, go ahead. And then Barbara, and then we'll go to Chip.
Yeah, they're actually doing a study of it, and I think we're going to see a preliminary draft in the next couple of weeks on it. And they've seen some really interesting things. They actually thought it was more about getting funds to support it, but it's really about how you build it and get it done on timeline.
They being who?
What's that?
I'm sorry?
They being who, it's a partnership to get the school built. So you work with a builder in the way, and I can't explain it well. So that their study is going to be helpful in explaining it. But that's how George Mason, the Meridian High School, was built on the timeline it was built on.
Okay.
At
Wow.
least one thing to mention with that, there was like 3 years in advance of the quick build. So there's a lot of upfront work with a design build and their public-private partnership. So there is upfront work that has to go too.
Barbara?
Hey, John, actually, I thought you were wrapping up and I wanted to share some thank yous. So if you still have some questions, why don't you go to those first? Thanks.
Sure. Okay. Chip, and then anyone else?
I was just curious, John, with the process that was just put up there by Michael. I mean, there's obviously a lot of good discussion tonight, right? There's a lot of, different ideas and opinions on things. And so how does this information, I guess, it just seemed like such a good discussion is how does this then pass along to, these upcoming work sessions? I mean, is staff going to kind of bring these concerns and talk about these things that we talked about? Or you would hate to say, well, we just had this discussion and, well, I don't know, where does it go, right? You put together your report, obviously, and a number of other things were discussed here. And so what happens with it, I guess?
That's a good question. I think I'll try to continue to get greater clarity on, what is the maneuvering room, i.e., on the CIP, how, and I still am not entirely clear on how much is kind of being sought to set in stone and move forward no matter what versus, no, we really can make changes. So I don't have a good answer. I think tonight is consistent with what I've heard and what I've tried to say. If people feel strongly differently that they heard FAC adopt a different position or majority of FAC change views, let me know. Please let me know. I don't think so. I think we've added some nuance, but I'll try to address that. This is sort of discussion I wish with a better process we should be having earlier in the process. Part of this year was not anyone's fault, in my view. The fact that staff came up with a project proposed option for the Career Center in the spring was a function of many things that was beyond their control. I would have loved to have had this 6 months prior. In a normal year, I would have loved to have had this 6 months prior. And I believe these processes need to be extended in time. We spent a lot of this year where I would have loved to have these discussions, and we could have followed up on some of these creative thinking type of things to see if they have legs and what makes sense. Now, come the fall, anyway, I don't have a better answer than that. I do think that the feedback is useful and helpful. As chair, I think FAC plays an important role. Am I frustrated at times? Yes. With the process in particular, and some of the decisions sometimes. But that's goes with the par for the course. So we will see. I hope to have a better answer for you in a couple of weeks. When you're FAC chair and vice chair, sometimes you can hear some things through staff, board that maybe is not widely known. I do feel that board members really do want to hear from us. And I think maybe the thing I'll stress is they really need to hear earlier from us to have better impact, which many of you have been saying, and I agree with. So, Chip, I didn't directly address that question, and but I hope that's at least somewhat helpful.
Thanks, John.
Thank you. Barbara?
Yeah, thanks, John. Are you wrapping up the meeting?
Yeah, usually I'll stay on after, but yes, yes.
Sure. Yeah, and I know you said at the beginning, you kind of shared members who are rolling off, or you and Colleen, for example, you're sticking around for a year. We're very sorry to be losing Colleen, but just as a, if we were all in person, we'd be maybe having some cupcakes now. Just want to say thank you, John, for everything you've done. And we did get an email. I don't know if anyone said this during the meeting. Jim Meikle had sent an email to us saying, please thank John for being the greatest champion for MCMM and maintenance. And, he really, really wanted to send his appreciation to you as well. But, it's a tough job being a chair of any of our advisory committees and representing the diverse voices and ideas and all the issues, and things do move fast. And just want to thank you very much for your work. And I know we will get to have you for another year providing your advice as a member of the FAC, but want to thank you very much, in front of your committee members. And again, thank you to Colleen, who is a tremendous voice and advocate. And you must come back. We want you back, but we wish you well with whatever you do next. And just similarly, everyone else who may be rolling off the committee now, thank you all so much for everything you've done for APS. And finally, I would be remiss if I didn't just say, again, with you all here, how extraordinary our staff is and the great work they've done. We're so excited about working with Marcus Gregory and, just everyone who's contributed to this meeting and all the work all year long. How you, of all folks, know how hard they work. And they've just done tremendous work, especially during this difficult time. And again, I just really wanted to share that with you all. And again, we would now be diving into our cupcakes, but instead we'll go on to our evenings at home. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. I really thank you very much for closing on that note. Everyone, thank you. Have a good evening. We'll be in touch, and I'll stick around for another 5 or 10 minutes to talk about anything, including feedback on this discussion, thoughts that may have changed or not. So again, thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Colleen.
Bye.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you
everyone.
both.
Bye.
Thank you.
No one wanted to stay for the virtual cupcakes.
No, they want real cupcakes.
We'll have to do that sometime for sure. All right. Well, thank you. That was a long meeting.
Okay. Yes. It actually needs to be much longer in person. It's actually been a little bit shorter on virtual. So, okay. Well, thank you for joining.
Yeah. I think that I don't know. I think you all think this is more set in stone than it is. I don't think that as things change and evolve all the time. So I'm really not as well. I mean, obviously, I'm not as pessimistic as you are about how this is going to play out. But there's a long year ahead to do more work on this, and you'll be around for that. So.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, and we will talk soon.
Have a good evening. Bye.
You too. Bye. All right, I'm hanging up. Anyone else is left? Good night.